Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge I do have some of my PSA family here with me. One of my coworkers actually work on the same floor, Latasha Malloy, pretrial officer. And also one of my team members, Mr. Antonio Green, is sitting right beside her. And I do believe I have one more team member coming in, so we'll hopefully he'll come in before I get too deep into the presentation. But I'm happy to acknowledge and see that they are here to support me. Okay. Without further ado, order of presentation. I'm going to provide introduction to the agency. Just talk about the problem, how it evolved, why it must be resolved, the action learning process, recommendations for action, personal growth and development, my team's growth and development, and some closing thoughts. All right. I'm sorry. My team's over here. So the question is, why is it that you see liquor stores in every corner in DC, it appears, but you don't see any bail bonds offices? Can anyone answer that question for me? Go on, Jack.
I was saying I have that very question, so I'm curious to hear your answer.
Oh my gosh, the answer is so simple. It's because of the pretrial services agency. It's because of us, in part, but we're not responsible for the liquor, though. We're formalized as an agency with the passage of the 1967 Bail Agency Act, and we're certified as a federal agency in the year 2000. And we are made up of 350 to 400 employees. And we are an independent entity under the auspices of CSOSA, which is the probation and parole side. They handle probation and parole matters, but we're an independent entity of them. But switching gears a little bit, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the story of Khalif Browder. He was incarcerated in New York for a crime that he was not found guilty of, stealing a backpack at the age of 16. While in custody, he was brutalized by both prison guards and inmates, and he suffered severe paranoia and anxiety after his release. At the age of 22, he woke up one morning and hung himself outside of his mother's window, and she had to find him. And I would ask for you to imagine if this is one of your family members. Such a tragedy as this would never happen in DC. The reason why is anyone who's arrested in DC has to be seen by a judge within 72 hours. And also, it's because of what we do through our guiding principles. We believe in the presumption of innocence. We believe that our clients are truly innocent until proven guilty, and we only recommend preventative detention as a last resort. Non-financial conditional release. About 85% of all arrestees are released on their personal recognizance, and reliance on money bail discriminates against indigent defendants. So, and it's not an indicator of whether or not someone will return to court or that the community will be safe. Pro-social interventions. We utilize our resources to make broken individuals whole again, all the while decreasing the risk of recidivism. And finally, innovation and development of human capital. What good is any organization if they're not investing in their people? Our mission is to promote pretrial justice and enhance community safety. And our vision is to thrive as a leader within the justice system through a diverse, inclusive, and empowered workforce that embodies integrity, excellence, accountability, and innovation in the delivery of the highest quality services. So you ask yourselves, what is silo behavior? It's when several departments or groups do not want to share information or knowledge with other individuals in the same company. I'll talk to you about how silo behavior evolved at our agency. It began with demolition practices. In our early federal years, there was a demand for innovation. We had people working at the ground level to develop our programs, and we had all these new federal resources that we didn't have before when we were a DC government agency. Those technical experts that are responsible for those great programs that we've built upon today, as the agency grew, they entered into leadership positions. And research says that technical experts who are promoted to managerial leadership positions, sometimes they organizations can suffer considerable human and financial costs when those individuals don't have the leadership abilities to be able, they have the technical expertise but don't have the leadership abilities to foster a good culture and good practices beyond their technical knowledge. And that mindset and the ways that technical leaders can lack the right leadership competencies act breeds an independent achiever culture. In an independent achiever culture, individual performance and achievement is rewarded, and employees are not motivated to exhibit teamwork across teams of departments to achieve mission goals. And then finally, we have executive leadership styles. During the first 17 years of the agency's existence, pre-federal years and into the federal years, we had a leader, a director, who had an affiliative leadership style. Affiliative leaders create emotional bonds and harmony, and their motto is people come first. So as you heard me say in the beginning, I said my pretrial family is here. That's the type of culture, the norms, she made us feel like work was home. And people could skip through the chain of command and go to her directly to solve problems. In 2012, we had a change of command. We had a new director come in, and he embodies democratic and pace-setting leadership styles. The pace-setting leader, they expect excellence and self-direction. And then democratic leaders build consensus through participation. But it's less of that homey feel and style that was exhibited by the previous director. But beyond that, one of the biggest downfalls when the leadership transition occurred was the fact that our leader, our current director, failed to clearly tell us what his vision and values were. And because of that, we went on as an agency without a clear direction of where we're going, and people were stuck operating in the old culture and old cultural norms, and some people were trying to figure out how to ascribe to what was new, even though it wasn't clearly stated. So, as a consequence, our 2013 Federal Viewpoint Survey results declined significantly. We dropped from being the top 10 subcomponent federal agency to the top 25, even though that's still high, it was a significant drop. In order to address the issue, our Office of Strategic Development was tasked with assembling a work group and to look at and tease out the top concerns. And as a result, it was the future direction of the agency, communication and transparency, concern about agency leadership, lo and behold, and in staff development opportunities. And all of those top tier concerns that were identified are byproducts of silo behavior. So, why is it important to resolve this issue? First, it reduces efficiency, and the animation kind of speaks for itself. Second, it impedes our case flow process. Our case flow process is interconnected, phase, and cyclical. When defendants are initially arrested and booked at the court services program level, that is where their first contact with PSA occurs. And the court services program facilitates the drug testing, the compilation of the reports that the judicial officers use to make pretrial release decisions. After that, the cases funnel, about 80% of our clients funnel through our supervision programs pending trial. And then cases are transferred between supervision and treatment based on special supervision needs. That could be substance abuse, it could be mental health, other things could present while they're at the initial phase in our general supervision level that will require us to reassess them and send them to treatment. Communication, as you can see with the process, say if they get rearrested at any part of the phase and they go back to court services, data entry, verbal communication, all that about the client's case is important. And if there's any breakdown in the process, then we're not really ensuring that our client is receiving the best services. Third, it impacts achievement of our bottom line. So we have 3 goals. We want people not to be arrested, no failures to appear, and we want them to maintain compliance with their release conditions while their case is pending. 88% of our arrestees return to court, and 88% avoid rearrest prior to trial. So we keep those numbers high, those percentage numbers high. And silo behavior threatens our ability to maintain excellence in this regard. Then we have external factors. Judges want more specialized supervision options. There are shifts in crime trends. We just requested for our next fiscal year about $2.8 million in order to address the rise in synthetic drug use alone. At the same time, we're stuck in a controlled federal budget crisis. It's continuously challenging us to do more with less. And finally, the country is moving away from the bricks and mortar approach of the 90s under the Clinton years and embracing more restorative justice, and that's what we're in the business of doing. We have pretrial agencies from across the nation and in some developing countries who come, delegations that come to see what we're doing so that they can model their programs after us. And having the ability to face these challenges and opportunities head on will be highly contingent upon the cohesion of our programs. So, for a quick recap, what silo behavior does, it reduces our efficiency, it impedes our caseflow process, it impacts the percent achievement of our critical success factors, and impacts our ability to properly manage external threats and opportunities. Now going into the team formation. When I was brainstorming about my team, I consulted heavily with my executive sponsor prior to soliciting team participation. During our meeting, there was an implication that their leaders above our first line level might not be available to participate. So in order to leverage that limitation, I requested and got acceptance from an executive level leader outside of operations to serve as my action learning coach. As you see, the team members are Mr. Antonio Green, Mr. John Lucas. They're assigned programs that they currently work in now. Mr. Craig Stevenson, and of course myself, and all of us have experience working in all 3 of the programs that I just talked about in the diagram from our work experience. And then my executive sponsor is Ms. Catherine Terry Cruiser, who is our Associate Director and Director of Operations. During the kickoff meeting, the coaches asked the team to explain why they chose to participate on the team. And Mr. Green said he had a desire to challenge himself and tap into a new learning experience. Mr. Stevenson said he was interested in continuous professional development, and a recent executive detail revealed a need to enhance his leadership abilities. And much like Mr. Stevenson, Mr. Lucas said his recent executive detail experience led him to ask himself where he stood in terms of his competencies and what he must develop in order to transition to the next level. So this is our meeting schedule. At my kickoff meeting, I delivered a presentation that covered why the problem had organizational relevance and urgency. But I did something a little bit different. I didn't introduce a problem statement initially. I chose to save that for later, and I'll explain why later. I explained the 6 components of action learning, the action learning stages, and I played a video clip of Daniel Goleman discussing emotional intelligence. And he just also talks about being a good team player and an active listener. And those skills are critical to the action learning process. Another thing that Daniel Goleman mentioned in the clip is for leaders to continuously undo over-rehearsed habits and build new ones to achieve better results. And then I concluded my action learning meeting by talking about the VABs, the values, assumptions, and beliefs, the thought processes and role of the action learning coach. And meeting 4, as you can see, had to be canceled due to inclement weather. And I have a star by meeting 5 because that was the first time we were able to actually meet everyone was able to be present at the same time. And that was by far our most productive meeting. And not including the kickoff meeting, the team met a total of 6 times and spent 8 hours working on the problem. So going into our meetings and what came from them, meetings 1 through 4, I kind of grouped together. It involved problem framing and problem reframing, and we spent a lot of time testing our assumptions. So our opening question was, how well are we preparing new hires to understand the critical functions of the agency? From that, in the diagram, we were able to tease out the work processes and training and culture, with silo behavior being the central focus, but the initial problem statement still I didn't introduce yet because I wanted to see if my assumptions about the problem were going to be reflected in what we did in our meetings. And apparently a lot of those assumptions were teased out as presented in the diagram. We determined at the conclusion of those first 4 meetings, not including the kickoff, so I would say the first 3 meetings, that the problem statement as stated below was too broad, and so it needed to be scaled down. And to introduce a moment where covert processes were in play, there was a moment when Ms. Fay, who was our coach, said that when we were discussing training, she said that we may not be able to get seasoned employees to be on board with a new training project. And to me, that was a covert process in play because she was going back to, in her knowledge, the history of some staff being resistant to change and resistant to unlearning. So I kind of called that out in my personal notes to make note of that for the presentation. Then meetings 5 through 8, we managed to reframe the problem statement from how can PSA eliminate silo behavior among its programs to how can PSA improve communication channels across operations to reduce silo behavior. So we were able to go from the broad issue of silo behavior and tease out one specific thing, communication, as our focus. And our coach, with asking these questions, can we effectively communicate why it's important for us to change how we're doing things, and what would be the consequences for not doing so? That helped us to think critically about the feasibility of implementing our ideas. And then in meeting 7, the team completed a survey that listed the 5 potential actionable recommendations. We ranked them and came up with 2 priority feasible courses of action. So our actionable recommendations that I presented to the executive sponsor was, first, create a first-line supervisors forum with structure and rules and a mission statement where ideas can be introduced, and invite our executive level leaders to attend these sessions with predetermined focus topic. That was to address kind of the leadership aspect. I'll talk later about why we decided to split the focus between leadership and staff, that they both be able to benefit from the recommendations. The second one was to establish an interagency communication committee for line staff. And the initial primary focus, of course, would be on operations, and then eventually encompass the rest of the agency, because it's not good to just, we're already operating in silos, so if we just keep something focused in operations when administration has a lot to do with our success, we need them to be on board too. It needs to be a global initiative. So we came up with a implementation plan using the 4P model, which allows you to parcel out what your purpose is, what your intended change looks like, the picture, the plan, and the part. And of course the purpose is to improve communication to reduce siloed behavior, and evidence, measurable actions, or evidence of results would be improvement in our 2017 FEVS results in the areas of communication, trust, transparency, and employee morale, and then increase the measures of achievement for our critical success factors, our bottom line, and then improve internal and external customer service. The plan would be to establish project goals and benchmarks and deadlines and ensure strategies are aligned with our cultural values. And then the executive leadership, the part would involve executive leadership and also the line managers working together to foster a good implementation of the plan. So my part B goes into my personal growth and development. In 2012, I took an assessment during a mentoring program, and I was able to, the assessment involved a DISC profile. Is anyone familiar with DISC profile? And so I am a DISC profile C, and these are my characteristics of my profile. My goals are accuracy and objective processes. I'm what you would call an independent achiever. I judge others by expertise, and my logic is exacting standards. It's very rigid. And my fears are being wrong, and strong displays of emotion, and I could increase my effectiveness through acknowledging others' feelings and looking beyond the data. I think the key part there is looking beyond the data. I use that DISC profile and those characteristics to help me to determine what my personal development goals would be with my CDWs. So I chose leading change, leading people, and results driven. And they were, as I said, informed by what I knew my characteristics were in my DISC profile. So I had my goals listed here and my outcomes. I wanted to improve communication, my communication skills, and increase consistency with producing deliverables. So throughout the process, I made sure that I consulted with my executive sponsor to keep her abreast of our progress, leading people, consensus building architect, influential leader. I believe that I was able to connect with my team on a different level, on a more personal level, because I was able to think outside of my workspace and to be able to identify with them in a more personal way as we teased out the issues that came on the table through our meetings. And then I believe through that I was also able to foster a supportive learning environment. Results driven was my third, and I wanted to become a better systems thinker, and I wanted to get to action stage 5. And the reason why we didn't get beyond that is because unlike some federal organizations, we have a collective bargaining unit. And so our collective bargaining unit, we have to make sure that whatever we're coming up with, that's an action that we consult with them and negotiate with them before anything hits the table. So we spent, like I said, a lot of time teasing out, and we didn't have enough time to get to the point where we could actually make actions come to fruition. I believe I transitioned from an independent achiever to an interdependent collaborator by introducing the problem statement to the team later in the process, and that helped me to challenge myself in wanting to know, and the result was that the team engaged in problem sense making by utilizing multi-frame thinking. And Bowman and Deal say multi-frame thinking requires moving beyond the narrow and mechanical approaches for understanding organizations. I steered the team towards embracing that knowing and negative capability at the kickoff meeting and during the action learning process, to the point where they took ownership of the problem and they identified other leaders at their level as possible perpetrators of silo behavior. Whereas prior to my action learning experience, I had harbored doubt in my ability to lead in place. My teachable point of view, supported by Quinn, is to always see the bigger picture. From an individual perspective, he says that people become masters of management, that become masters of management don't see their work environment only in structured, analytic ways. Instead, they also have the capacity to see it as a complex, dynamic system. And that's me moving away from being focused just on exacting standards and the narrow, one-track, sometimes mindedness of being an independent achiever. And on an organizational perspective, which broadens the picture, he says, an enlightened and thriving organization as a whole contains competent people whose jobs are not defined or evaluated solely in terms of technical task completion. So team growth. I based the team growth as I reflected on it through Schwartz and Quinn. And I believe that my team got to the point where we got to the point where we were operating as a mutual learning team. And we surfaced undiscussables through our process. One of them was first line managers' sense of disempowerment to take action and implement ideas, toxic personalities and lack of cooperation from other colleagues, and a lack of effective communication and support from superiors. And when I say that, line managers not always feeling supported by the executive leadership. We built trust by teasing out these undiscussables and established vulnerability. And that happened when Mr. Stevenson gave us an example of when he was in the court services program, which currently is in supervision. And he said, Mr. Green asked him, why do you feel alone when you were a supervisor in the diagnostic unit? He said, we don't share our special accomplishments from program to program. We're so task-focused and diagnostic, we rarely see the fruits of our labor. And that helped us to see basically how focus on unit initiatives was blinding us from seeing the broader process outcomes, which helps you to give more purpose and meaning to what you're doing every day through your daily work. His candid admission of his complacency and not seeking to know more about the work outside his unit produced a breakthrough for us in that time. During meeting 5, we started to kind of have more breakthroughs in regards to the problem itself. Mr. Green said it's not necessarily that we don't want to share information, as the definition of silo behavior explains. It says sometimes people just don't realize who else needs to know because the silos have caused us not to need to know or care. Mr. Lucas said it's too easy for us to sit in our cubicles and be successful. That's independent achiever culture. And when he made that statement, he unknowingly alluded to that. And then we came to team consensus. Line managers play a role in the problem, but they also, because of the virtue of where they are in an organization, have the biggest potential to have the biggest impact on reducing the problem. And so, as I mentioned before, we didn't have the opportunity to progress to the action stage, so we were unable to make, I think, from my vantage point, the team was unable to make the most significant strides in developing their competencies. However, at the last meeting, I gave them a brief survey, and they completed a brief survey to capture more of their reflections on the action learning experience. And Mr. Lucas said, reporting on what he learned, that he didn't realize the silent behavior was more of a problem than it was, and communication may be our biggest hurdle. Mr. Green, whose ECQs are all listed, said that what he learned about himself while participating on the team, I never realized that we functioned in silos and how comfortable I am with this behavior. And Mr. Stevenson said that in response to whether or not he would recommend the process moving forward, he said, yes, I believe it's a good way to think through a problem and come to a general understanding of the direction to proceed and to resolve the problem. One way Mr. Green said he would apply what he learned through action learning was to include other supervisors across programs in his change efforts moving forward. And then Mr. Stevenson went a step further and sent me an email after the fact, and got some more quotes from him that I thought were valuable. He said, I hope the agency adopts this process for addressing other issues in the agency. I now plan to use the process moving forward in my unit, and this process made me re-examine myself as a leader and how my actions affect those that I'm responsible for, and how he has an influence on the culture of the agency. And I think one of the key ones at the bottom is, the problem I see is if other supervisors believe they play a significant role in reshaping the culture of the agency. And since I got the green light to continue on this project post-graduation, I'd say to you that we are going to be able to have the opportunity to work on that and challenge ourselves in developing our competencies to address that. So 4 major takeaways and considerations moving forward. It's important that whatever change effort that we try to exact is led, and people can see from the top that our executive leaders are building trust. Because anything that we do, anything that we come out with, any initiative, if people don't feel like there's trust established at all levels within the organization, then it will be for naught. We need to make sure that we include our collective bargaining unit in our change initiatives, address issues concerning first-line managerial support and sense of empowerment, because they are so important with being able to be that bridge between the top and the middle, and I don't want to say the bottom, but the line staff, the whole organization, they can be the conductors of the change. So if they get the support they need, then they'll be able to do that more effectively. And then we have a lot of change efforts actually in progress. So we should leverage whatever recommendations that we've developed moving forward with those. They include, we're going through a reorganization right now of our programs. We're adding 2 more programs to the 3 that we already have. We just ratified a collective bargaining agreement, a new one with our union, and those are just a couple of things that we can latch on to moving forward. And through that, we'll be able to keep our strategic cycle of success going. So finally, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the people who helped me along the journey. I'd like to acknowledge my dad, who's been the still, calm voice in my head, who pushed me to return to grad school. I'd like to acknowledge Professor Zaplin, because she took my call when I was trying to decide whether I was going to come to AU from GW, and she was on vacation in Vermont, and she took my call and was able to connect me to people in Key to get my process going. And of course, last but not least, my wonderful classmates. You all sewed so deeply into my life in words that I can't really express in words, but I will forever carry in my heart, and for that I'm very grateful.
Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'd like to go back to when you were talking about your organization, that collective bargaining element.
Yes.
And how it's kind of the speed bump, but it seems to me, based on your topic, of being siloed, that it would assist in that, because if they, it's my understanding, if they accept and embrace what the issue is and your recommendations forward, then it kind of removes that silo behavior even further because more of the organization is accepting it. Do you agree with that? And do you think that they are going to accept it?
Absolutely, because I think going to Bob's talk recently that he made on the myth that there is contention between, that there has to be contention between the collective bargaining unit and the agency, helps to bring perspective to that question. It's basically that at our agency, it's not as bad as it seems. There are some issues that are personal that kind of infuse the work, and I think sometimes it's just shifting people's understanding of what are we really here to do, and with each intention, what are we trying to achieve? And our history at our agency is that we do get things done, and the relationship between management and the collective bargaining unit has had its tensions, but it has improved lately, I would say. And even though we've recently hired some new people on the management side, I'd say in HR, because we have HR professionals who support management and to handle collective bargaining issues, we have some new people on board, but once they understand what we're about, which as Ruth would say, the executive leaders have to make sure that they explain what we're about, but we're still in a place where we're not really sure who we are yet. We still need our director to come out and say, this is who I am, and this is how I'm different from the leader of the past, and this is how I see us moving forward. Are you on board? So we still need to, we have a lot of work to do with the wickedness of the problem so that we can have more focus for the future. Yes, ma'am.
So with the silent behavior, obviously was part of the culture. So for yourself, how would you say that you were kind of able to transcend that environment? Because, I mean, it kind of required you to operate within that structure.
Right. I started at the agency, it was my first professional experience, and I've been there in July, will make it 9 years. So it was I go back to what Mr. Lucas said, I was able to sit in my cubicle and be successful, but I didn't just sit in my cubicle. I was out front trying to do things to get my name in lights. And the aspect of the culture that says it's okay to do that helped me to be able to kind of get promoted and progress. But as I continued to challenge myself in leadership programs, like I did one for the graduate school, and I did a couple other things just to keep myself motivated and to keep my skills up, I began to see that that's problematic. And as I began to work on work groups and be asked to take on some informal leadership roles, I began to see how deeply people would take personal issues and infuse them into getting to work done, and how it was detrimental to us being productive. And that's what pushed me to come back to school. A lot of it was sitting there and saying, it doesn't have to be this way, and we can do better because we are a great organization. In the beginning, I tell you the importance of the work we do, and that we're kind of the only federal agency that does what we do. And there are so few agencies at the state level or existence of organizations like ours for people. And so if we're outside, people see us doing great things and we're setting all these standards, we should have that same type of excellence happening internally in how we treat each other, how we deal with each other. And even though we're still making good strides in achieving our bottom line, it can slowly be chipped away. It's what you're not paying attention to because it appears to be going well that will catch you on that good day. So, yes.
When you go into the next stage of like starting to like identify the issues, are you gonna bring in more people, or I mean, like, are you gonna bring people from different parts of the organization?
That's a very good question. So when I sat with my executive sponsor, she offered to to offer her new deputy to sit with our team and to join the team in our efforts. And I was surprised at that, but I think she was impressed with what we were able to tease out. And I was very candid with her about what came out with the undiscussables. And since she's also, I should know, a graduate of the Key program, and also did her action learning project eons ago, but yet still understands, she takes it seriously, and I do believe that she wants to get the best results out of it, and doesn't. And I told her, I said, this is not just about school. This is more personal to me from having watched it from a low level and have come up to kind of where I've hit the ceiling at the line level and seen it now. I've worked in every program now, just about, and I've seen it. So she's willing to allow, or not to allow, but to offer that up to us as we move forward. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the process of kind of identifying the top priorities of the prospective solutions. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with that list? I think you said there were 5, and you chose 2.
Yes, so for us, I think Phil alluded to it kind of becoming a therapeutic session, and for us it kind of ended up being that way. And I found myself, at one point, I think I told Patrick, kind of being a little bit overwhelmed because I was taking notes and I was taking it in, and I was observing and I was learning and I was seeing myself in the observer seat all at the same time. And I think that was a limitation. And so I finally, I got a grip and got myself together and developed the survey. I did a survey with about four potential reframed problem statements, and then also 5 actionable recommendations. I think it was around meeting 5 or 6. We all sat down, we filled it out, and ranked everything from the 2 sections, and from that is how we produced the 2 priority options for implementation. Is everyone teased out and said, no, it's not work processes, no, it's not really so much culture. I think the most, not so much that it's not that, but that communication was going to be the most actionable thing to develop and use to develop a plan to address the problem. That culture is probably too big and we probably can't chop that up, but if we improve communication, we can touch on everything. And so that's how we did it. We did a survey and ranked.
The questions that you included on the survey, were they kind of a compilation of your notes and kind of what people were talking about in the therapeutic sessions, or were they kind of with your knowledge of it?
Exactly, that's what it was. After each meeting, I was encouraging my team to reflect, but it was hard to be able to kind of gather that, and it was a little bit chaotic in the beginning. Like I said, it wasn't till meeting 5 that we're able to actually meet fully as a group. We were kind of missing people in between. So but I personally was taking notes and going back and recapping and kind of passing out, like, this is what happened in this previous meeting. Let's see how we can work from that. And there was a turning point, I think, for me in the second meeting where my actual learning coach helped me because I was sticking to writing and not diagrams and thinking about people see things differently and learn in different ways. So she did a big bubble with the silo behavior and all the different main themes that were coming out and said, how about if you present it this way, then we can focus where we're going. That helped me so much. And from there, I was starting at the next meetings to be able to pass those things out, and we're more productive when I was coming up with ways to chunk the information in visual examples instead of just passing out notes. Yeah, so that's a good question.
I have a couple questions. So,
Yes.
First of all, what a wonderful mission that your organization has. It's just a fantastic, I think we've talked about this before, it's really, really important. And so many organizations struggle with silos. In fact, we had a group of Health and Human Services in here as a cohort in the certificate program last year. They referred to their silos as cylinders of excellence. But I have two questions, one organizational, one personal. The organizational one is that she mentioned that 2 of your team members, when you asked them about being part of the action learning process, had said that they had experienced, based on recent exposure through assignments, that they had growth to do. Am I right?
That's right.
That's remarkable. Did that make the action, that's remarkable and admirable, did that make the action learning team function, was it easier for you than you thought it would be?
Well, I was pretty deliberate in the people that made it on the team, on the cert, if you will. Because, first of all, I knew where I stood. Right, exactly. And I actually was challenged. My executive sponsor challenged me. She brought up a name as we're going through names and who was available and who wasn't from her knowledge. Of one particular individual who's well known in the agency as being someone who would definitely challenge negative capability. He had that type of personality, and I said, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but that's not where I'm trying to go. I really want to see if I can be as productive as I can be, being honest about where my leadership experience and where I was coming from. To answer your question, it was a good thing and it was a bad thing, because towards the end my team was like, we get along too well, and they began to say, we want more negative capability. We want someone to challenge us because we agree with each other and we kind of have the same mindset, so we need more of that. But as I said, I knew from the beginning what I had, and I knew that it was going to be maybe a happy-go-lucky team. But it was because of the limitations of the availability, that the implication I got from my executive sponsor. But our action learning coach, with her breadth of experience as being a leader and in the criminal justice field and running her own business, she was really good, as I said, at kind of balancing things out and stopping the process, everything an action learning coach should do to keep us on task, and also to think critically. Where I was kind of sometimes stuck just trying to get it all down, she was driving and stopping and saying, hey, are we doing her job? Are we really thinking critically about this, or how could we be thinking differently?
The other thing that struck me, in your reflected best self exercise, you talked about a lot of things, and a lot of the stories in that exercise for you had to do with you being a peacemaker and how you were a peacemaker. And I think there was a story there about you saving a kid from being bullied in school, right, at one point. And so when I see your reference to the DISC scores that you talked about, I didn't see anything on that list that made me think peacemaker. Are you still a peacemaker? Could you see?
I believe I am. I think maybe my coworker right here could attest that people still come to me and still kind of look to me as being a leader or somebody that they can come to speak about their issues or their problems, because they know I'm going to listen, and I think they realize how vested I am in trying to do my best and trying to do the right thing. And I think one weakness that I have is not sometimes when I'm so focused and so married to what I'm doing, it may sometimes, in my view, maybe my blind spot is that I think people might find me to be unapproachable or rigid. And I didn't give all of the feedback that was given in the surveys that my team did at the end, but one thing that Mr. Green told me was, make sure that you're always approachable, because I asked him in the survey, how could I improve, how could I do better? And he said, always make sure that you present yourself as being approachable, because when I'm so serious sometimes about what I'm doing, it may seem like I'm not open. And I think that's the part of me that's reflected in my DISC style. Like, it's got to be this way, I got to know, I don't like to not know, things like that. But that real, organic Geraldine, who's not, when I'm not doing my work, or when you're coming to me as a human issue, is still that peacemaker, or that person that, makes people feel happy inside, I guess. Yeah.
So, in your, you were setting up the team, did it ever occur to you to ask a union representative to serve on your action committee?
I can tell you, Bob, that did not come to mind. It didn't come to mind.
It's not the camera, just don't worry.
Well, it's one thing you might consider in the future. I mean, the executive order talks about pre-decisional involvement. This is a quintessential example of pre-decisional involvement, where a management group does a lot of preliminary work, comes to the union, and then says, here's what we'd like to do, what do you think? As opposed to being part of the generative portion of the work. So it's just something to think about. Second, I noticed that there were 4 people on that team, 3 supervisors and you. So how did you manage the fact that you were not a supervisor, everybody else on the team was?
I think I mentioned that. I touched on it in my paper. I think for me, that's probably where there was a point where after a couple of meetings, before we got to meeting 5 where everybody was present, a couple of my team members at separate points pulled me to the side and said, hey, if you need to reel us in, you should. And I did feel throughout the process that I wasn't as confident in being able to tell them, hey, we need to do a little bit better about attendance, or how do we feel about how seriously we're taking the problem. And yes, they got to the point where they owned it, but it was only after we all were there together at that most productive meeting that real work happened, and I think the productivity started to go up higher. So I think you're calling me out, Bob, on a blind spot, and also I was caught up in trying to be focused, and I was also caught up in trying not to rustle feathers, and that is something that I have a tendency to do, and that is something that I have grown in. I think as I've become more confident in who I am as an individual, as I become more aware of how my inaction or my lack of vocalizing what I see, the detriment that it causes, I want to see things get better, and I want people to do better, and I want things to be done. So once I see how much that is me not doing what I ought to do is causing that detriment, then I'm more motivated to do that. So I've started that on the floor at work, but in the team I can definitely say that I probably wasn't as proactive as I could have been in addressing areas that we needed to improve upon, where, Phil's team kept him accountable. I probably didn't do such a good job keeping my team as accountable in the beginning.
So you described that the reason for that is you didn't want to ruffle feathers, right? So I guess that's fear, right?
Yeah.
So you also at the same time mentioned increased confidence as a result of doing this work. So how does the increased confidence impact or not the fear that you just described?
I have to keep engaging in this type of activity. I have to keep doing things such as action learning. I just have to keep putting myself in positions where I know I'm going to challenge myself. I think I mentioned in my final reflection, there was a point during one of our courses as we went through the program where we started to parcel out who were the speakers. And every time there was a group activity, it'd be the same people speaking, standing up. And during the budget course, so you had to do a group presentation, worked on everything in class. And I said to myself, it doesn't have to be the same person every time. So maybe I didn't do it in action learning, but throughout the program, I recognized, and we were going through the project, and everyone was like, "You sure? You sure you want to stand up and present for us?" And I was like, "Yeah, I got it." And I had dressed up on purpose that day a little bit nicer because I had made up my mind that I was gonna offer to be the presenter and that I was gonna do it, and I followed through with it. So it maybe didn't happen in action learning, but through the program, I had little nuggets of success, and it is through action. I think one of the best things that this program does is that it's not okay to sit in your cubicle, which would be to write a paper, a thesis, turn it in, and walk away. No, you have to do it. You have to go to your organization. You have to get past the fear. You have to stand up and present a kickoff meeting and get people to want to own what you're working on that's important to you. And I'll never forget that. That's my foundation that I continue to work on moving forward.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Start at 10 after?